The morning fog rolled gently across the sleepy English countryside, blanketing the small village of Millbrook in a soft, misty embrace. The sun was just beginning to peek over the distant hills, casting long shadows through the ancient pine trees that surrounded the village scout hall. Tom Edwards, a weathered scout leader in his late 40s, stood preparing his troop for their monthly wilderness training. His hands moved methodically, checking backpacks, examining maps, and ensuring every young scout was ready for the day's adventure. The 12 scouts, all between 11 and 13 years old, listened intently, their excited whispers creating a gentle background noise. William Parker, a tall and observant 12-year-old, stood slightly apart from the group. Unlike the other boys who were chatting and shuffling their feet, William had a keen eye for detail. His father, a local gamekeeper, had taught him to notice things others might miss. Today, something caught his attention, a subtle movement in the distant tree line that seemed out of place. The forest of Pine Valley stretched out before them, a dense green landscape that seemed to breathe with its own mysterious life. Old oak trees stood like silent guardians, their branches reaching out like protective arms. The morning light filtered through the leaves, creating a magical pattern of light and shadow. Something's different, William thought to himself, his eyes narrowing as he studied the distant trees. The other scouts were busy adjusting their backpacks and checking their hiking gear, but William's attention was completely focused on the forest. Tom noticed William's intense gaze. "Everything all right, Parker?" he called out, walking over to the young scout. William hesitated for a moment. He wasn't someone who liked to create unnecessary excitement, but something felt wrong. "Sir," he said quietly, pointing towards a cluster of ancient oak trees at the forest's edge, "I think I saw something moving." The other scouts fell silent. Tom Edwards was known for taking his scouts' observations seriously. He was a patient leader who understood that young eyes often saw things that adults might miss. He pulled out a pair of high-powered binoculars from his pack and carefully scanned the area William had indicated. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The forest remained still, with only the gentle movement of leaves in the morning breeze. But then, for just a moment, Tom saw it too, a flicker of movement, something small and out of place. "Good catch, William," Tom said, his voice calm but serious. The other scouts now stood quietly, their earlier excitement replaced by a sense of anticipation. Something was different about this morning, something that made the air feel charged with unexpected possibility. The scouts were a tight-knit group, trained not just in wilderness survival but in observing their environment. They had spent months learning how to read nature's subtle signs, tracking animal movements, understanding weather patterns, and knowing when something didn't feel right. William's discovery broke the morning's peaceful routine. The forest, which moments ago had seemed like a familiar training ground, now felt like it was holding a secret. The ancient trees seemed to lean in closer, as if whispering something just beyond human hearing. Tom began to organize the group, his military-like precision coming into play. "Stay close," he instructed the scouts. "We'll investigate carefully and systematically." Each scout knew their role, each understood the importance of moving as a disciplined unit. As they prepared to enter the forest, a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. It carried with it a sense of mystery, of something about to unfold. William remained at the front, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain, his body tense with anticipation. Little did they know that this ordinary morning was about to become an extraordinary journey, a story of unexpected courage, compassion, and the incredible power of paying attention to the world around them. The forest waited, silent and patient, holding its breath. The scouts moved carefully through the forest, their footsteps soft and measured. The morning light filtered through the branches, creating a mosaic of shadows on the forest floor. Tom Edwards led the group, with William Parker close behind, his eyes constantly searching the landscape. Suddenly, William's hand went up, a signal the scouts had practiced many times during their wilderness training. Something was different. Between two massive oak trees, almost hidden by a tangle of roots and fallen leaves, a small figure huddled. As they drew closer, the shape became clearer. A young boy, no more than 7 years old, sat pressed against the tree trunk. His clothes were torn and dirty, covered in leaves and mud. Dried tears streaked his pale cheeks, and his eyes darted back and forth with a fear that seemed too intense for such a young child. James Miller, the most compassionate scout in the group, was the first to react. He slowly reached for his water bottle, understanding that the child looked thirsty and scared. "It's okay," he said, his voice soft and gentle. "We're not going to hurt you." Tom Edwards approached carefully, years of experience teaching him how to handle delicate situations. He knelt down, keeping a respectful distance from the child. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. The boy said nothing. His eyes were a mix of terror and something else, a deep, unexplainable worry that seemed far too heavy for someone so young. He pulled his legs closer to his chest, making himself as small as possible. The other scouts watched silently. They had been trained in emergency situations, but nothing had prepared them for this moment. A lost child in the middle of the forest, looking more scared than they had ever seen anyone look before. William noticed details the others might have missed. The boy's shoes were worn almost through. His jacket was too small, with patches roughly sewn in place. Something wasn't right about this situation. James slowly placed his water bottle on the ground, pushing it gently towards the boy. "It's okay," he repeated. "We're here to help you." For a moment, nothing happened. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, the boy's hand reached out. His fingers trembled as he touched the water bottle, pulling it closer but not yet drinking. Tom made a subtle signal to his scouts. They needed to remain calm, to show the child they were safe. Years of wilderness training had taught them about unexpected encounters, about reading situations carefully. The boy's eyes continued to scan the forest, always looking, always searching. It was as if he was expecting someone or something to appear at any moment. His body remained tense, ready to run at the slightest provocation. James sat down, making himself smaller and less threatening. "My name is James," he said softly. "What's your name?" The boy's lips trembled. For a moment, it seemed he might speak. Then, something in the forest changed. A distant sound, barely audible, made the boy's entire body go rigid. The scouts exchanged a quick glance. Something was happening here, something more complicated than a simple lost child. The forest, which moments ago had seemed peaceful, now felt charged with an unexplained tension. William moved slightly, positioning himself to provide additional protection. His training, his natural instincts, told him this was more than just a routine rescue. Something significant was about to unfold. The boy's eyes met Tom's. In that moment, a connection happened, a silent understanding that transcended words. The scouts realized they were about to become part of something much bigger than their morning training exercise. The forest continued to watch, silent and patient, holding its secrets close. The forest seemed to grow quieter as Daniel Roberts, the youngest scout in the troop, slowly approached the hidden child. At 12 years old, Daniel had a gentleness that made him different from the other scouts. His mother, a social worker, had taught him to approach difficult situations with patience and compassion. "What's your name?" Daniel asked, his voice soft and warm. He kept a careful distance, understanding that sudden movements might frighten the boy further. The child's eyes darted between the scouts. Fear mixed with something else, a deep, grown-up worry that seemed out of place on such a young face. His hands, small and dirty, gripped the edges of his worn jacket tightly. Tom Edwards watched carefully. In all his years of leading scout troops, he had never seen a child quite like this. The boy seemed both terrified and determined, a complicated mix of emotions that didn't belong to childhood. William Parker noticed the boy's shoes, they were nearly falling apart, with rough patches that looked like desperate repairs. Something wasn't right about this situation. The way the child kept looking over his shoulder suggested he was running from something, not just lost. Slowly, carefully, the boy opened his mouth. His lips trembled. The scouts leaned slightly forward, their breath held in anticipation. Then he spoke. 4 words. 4 simple words that would change everything. "My dad isn't safe." The forest seemed to stop. Birds ceased their morning songs. The wind held its breath. Those 4 words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. These weren't the words of a lost child. These were the words of someone who had seen something no child should ever see. Tom Edwards immediately understood the weight of those words. His years of experience as a scout leader, as a father, as a community member told him this was more than a simple rescue. This was a moment that demanded action, compassion, and immediate care. The other scouts exchanged quick glances. They had been trained in emergency procedures, but nothing had prepared them for this. A child, alone in the forest, speaking about his father's safety with a gravity that seemed impossible for his age. James Miller moved slightly, offering the water bottle again. The boy's hand shook as he reached for it, his eyes never leaving the forest behind him. Always watching. Always afraid. William's keen observation skills kicked in. He noticed small details. The boy's jacket was mismatched, his hands had small bruises that looked like they didn't come from typical childhood adventures. Something darker was happening here. Daniel knelt down, keeping his distance but showing kindness. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now. We're here to help you." The boy's eyes met Daniel's. In that moment, something passed between them, a connection that went beyond words. Understanding that sometimes children see and understand far more than adults realize. Tom radioed the local authorities, keeping his voice calm and professional. But inside, his heart raced. Those 4 words, "My dad isn't safe," echoed in his mind. They spoke of a story much larger than a simple lost child in the forest. The scouts formed a protective circle around the boy. Not crowding him, but creating a safe space. A barrier between him and whatever he was running from. Each of them understood, without speaking, that they were now responsible for this child's safety. The forest continued to watch. The morning light filtered through the trees, creating patterns of light and shadow. But everything had changed. What had started as a routine wilderness training had become something else entirely. A rescue. A potential lifeline. A moment that would define these young scouts' understanding of courage, compassion, and the unexpected challenges life can bring. 4 words. That was all it took to transform an ordinary morning into an extraordinary journey of hope and protection. Tom Edwards moved quickly, his radio crackling with urgent communication to local authorities. But something in his gut told him they couldn't simply wait and do nothing. The boy, who they now knew was named Peter, continued to tremble, his eyes constantly scanning the forest with a fear that seemed far too intense for someone so young. William Parker noticed how Peter's hands wouldn't stop shaking. The boy's fingers were curled tightly into his palms, a defensive posture that spoke of something more than just being lost. James Miller had already draped his spare scout jacket around Peter's shoulders, creating a protective barrier against the morning's chill. Daniel Roberts, the youngest scout, sat closest to Peter. He remembered how his mother, a counselor who worked with troubled families, always taught him about the power of quiet presence. He didn't try to speak. He simply sat, creating a sense of safety that words couldn't provide. The other scouts understood without speaking. They formed a careful circle around Peter, not crowding him, but creating a human shield of protection. Each scout knew their role. Each understood the unspoken responsibility they now carried to protect someone vulnerable and scared. Tom's radio conversation was hushed but intense. "We found a child," he was saying, approximately 7 years old. "Appears distressed. Possible domestic situation." His professional tone masked the deep concern in his eyes. Peter's breathing was rapid, his eyes darting between the scouts. He hadn't spoken much since his 4 powerful words, but his body language told a story of fear and uncertainty. William noticed how the boy's shoes were mismatched, how his clothes looked like they'd been worn for days. James pulled out a small pack of emergency rations from his backpack. "Are you hungry?" he asked softly, opening a protein bar. Peter's eyes locked onto the food, revealing how truly hungry he was. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Sunlight filtered through the trees, creating patches of warmth that contrasted with the tension of the moment. Birds continued their morning songs, unaware of the drama unfolding beneath their branches. Daniel moved slightly, offering Peter his water bottle. The boy's hand shook as he reached for it, revealing bruises that looked more like defensive marks than typical childhood scrapes. The scouts exchanged a knowing glance. Something was very wrong. Tom finished his radio call and approached the group. His movement was slow, calculated. He'd dealt with difficult situations before, but something about this boy was different. The fear in Peter's eyes wasn't just about being lost, it was deeper, more complicated. "We're going to keep you safe," Tom said, his voice calm and steady. The scouts nodded in unison, a silent promise of protection. William pulled out a thermal blanket from his emergency kit, carefully draping it around Peter's shoulders. The boy flinched initially, then relaxed as the warmth surrounded him. It was a small moment of comfort in what seemed like a world of uncertainty. Each scout understood they were witnessing something important. This wasn't just a rescue. This was a moment of human connection. A moment where children became protectors. Where compassion meant more than training or rules. Peter's eyes began to show something different. Not just fear, but a tiny spark of hope. The first hint that perhaps he wasn't alone anymore. That perhaps someone was finally going to help him. The forest continued its quiet watch. Leaves rustled. Branches swayed. The morning light continued its gentle dance through the trees. A promise had been made. A troop of young scouts had become guardians. And something extraordinary was about to unfold. The distant sound of police sirens broke the forest's morning silence. Local law enforcement arrived within an hour, their vehicles carefully navigating the narrow forest paths. Tom Edwards stood beside Peter, creating a protective barrier between the boy and the approaching officials. Detective Sarah Morgan, a kind-faced woman with years of experience in child protection, approached slowly. Her movements were gentle, understanding the fragility of the moment. She knelt down to Peter's level, something the scouts had also done, showing respect and compassion. The story emerged slowly, like pieces of a complicated puzzle. Peter had walked miles through the forest, escaping a dangerous home situation. His father, struggling with personal problems, had created an environment of fear and uncertainty. The boy's bruises and worn clothing told a story more powerful than words. The Boy Scouts stood together, a united group of young protectors. William Parker documented everything he had observed, his keen eye for detail proving invaluable. James Miller held Peter's emergency bag, ensuring nothing was lost. Daniel Roberts remained close, offering silent support. "You're safe now," Detective Morgan said softly to Peter. The boy's eyes, which had been filled with constant fear, began to show something different. A tiny spark of hope. A glimmer of understanding that his nightmare might finally be ending. Tom Edwards provided a detailed account of their discovery. How William first noticed something unusual. How the scouts had carefully approached and protected the boy. Each detail was important, each moment a testament to their training and humanity. Peter looked back at the scouts, especially Daniel, and gave a small, brave smile. It was a smile that spoke volumes. A smile that said he understood he wasn't alone anymore. A smile that suggested survival, hope, and the kindness of strangers. The forest, which had seemed dark and threatening just hours earlier, now felt like a place of rescue and new beginnings. Sunlight continued to filter through the trees, casting warm patches on the ground. Birds sang their morning songs, seemingly unaware of the drama that had just unfolded. Child Protective Services arrived, bringing with them a sense of professional care and compassion. They carefully documented Peter's condition, ensuring he would receive the support and help he needed. Medical professionals checked his health, providing immediate care for his minor injuries. The scouts watched quietly, understanding they had been part of something extraordinary. They hadn't just completed a wilderness training exercise. They had saved a child. They had made a difference. Tom Edwards felt a sense of pride. These young scouts had demonstrated courage, compassion, and humanity beyond their years. They had shown that age doesn't determine one's ability to help others. That kindness could be a powerful form of protection. As Peter was carefully prepared for transportation, he kept looking back at the scouts. His eyes were different now. No longer filled with constant fear, but with a glimmer of hope. An understanding that good people exist. That help can come from unexpected places. William carefully handed over the notes he had taken, ensuring every detail was documented. James gave Peter the water bottle he had originally offered. Daniel remained close, a silent guardian who had helped change a life. The forest seemed to breathe a collective sigh. The morning that had started with mystery and tension was ending with hope and rescue. The ancient trees stood as silent witnesses to an extraordinary human moment. Local media would later report the story. Boy Scouts rescue child in dramatic forest encounter, the headlines would read. But no headline could capture the true essence of what had happened. The human connection. The moment of pure compassion. As the vehicles prepared to leave, Peter gave a final wave to the scouts. A small gesture that said more than words ever could. A thank you. A promise of hope. A reminder that in the darkest moments, kindness can be a powerful light. The forest continued its gentle morning routine. Leaves rustled. Branches swayed. The world moved forward, forever changed by a moment of unexpected courage.